So let's just kick this off and get this going. Thanks everybody for coming today. Again, you can raise your hand, and I think Alex is on here too, so he can hopefully can kind of organize some of the questions and answers as well, or let me know if something's come up if I'm looking at the screen. And yeah, I'm good. Also, the deck will be available, and I believe the video recording will be available as well. So if you guys need to drop off or something, no problem, you can come back to it. And just to make sure everybody's here for the right thing, we are talking about building a model-driven Power App today. So if you've come for something completely different, I'll ask you to stick around anyway, because this is a lot of cool stuff, and hopefully you'll learn something from it. All right, just a little bit about myself. My name is Nick Dolman. I am presenting to you guys from Ottawa, Canada today. Got a little bit of snow happening, and I'm a Microsoft MVP in business applications. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. If you have questions later you think of later about this particular presentation, you can reach out to me on Twitter or through my blog, or connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're going to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's okay. Just maybe put a note to say that you saw my webinar, just so I can understand where you're coming from. I know I get a lot of invites, and I kind of want to know where people have seen me or where they've seen my stuff. So today we're going to talk about the next hour or so. We're going to talk about a few things, talk about what is the Power Platform, if you're unfamiliar with that term. We're also going to talk about what a Power App is in context within the Power Platform. And you know, I know a lot of people just don't like staring at slides all the time, so we're actually going to go through and we're going to build a fairly simple model-driven Power App, and hopefully that gives you enough inspiration that you can go on and start building your own in your own office. I'll actually show you how you can even do that for free to get going with it. Of course, if you need to deploy it to your company, there's licensing implications, and I'm not even gonna really drill down far into that at all, just because that can be it's an hour-long talk in itself. And we're gonna go through all this stuff and just want to make you comfortable with what the material is and understand what Power Apps are. So I don't see any questions yet, so I'm just gonna proceed on. So first question that a lot of people have is, what exactly is the Microsoft Power Platform? You'll hear this term a lot. You'll see Microsoft talk about it in context of, you'll hear about Azure and Office 365, but really it is a low-code platform that really, it spans Office 365, Azure, and it has a lot of its roots in Dynamics 365. So if you worked with Dynamics 365, a lot of what I'll show you today probably will seem very familiar. And it's really a great platform for building standalone applications. So if you have very unique business requirements, and you have looked at off-the-shelf systems and realized it doesn't quite fit, or you looked into hiring a developer to build something from the ground up and that was way too expensive, the Power Platform is a great place to deploy those business applications very quickly and efficiently. And there's about 7 aspects, and I'm not going to drill down too deeply into most of these except for Power Apps. But in terms of doing analytics on the data, there's Power BI with dashboards, and there's a ton of stuff you can do there. With Power Apps, this is what we're going to be focusing on today, the ability to very quickly build business applications using some very easy to use tools. Of course, we can tie that into Power Automate and automate a lot of that. That's the Power Automate is the name. It used to be known as Microsoft Flow, if you've heard that before. And there's some other aspects to the Power Platform as well, specifically Power Virtual Agents, those chat bots that I'm sure we've all seen on websites popping up. And that's just on a foundation of data connectors. So with those data connectors, whether we're using Power Apps or Power Automate or some of the other ones, we can connect to a variety of different data sources and go outside of the Microsoft sort of universe as well. And we can connect to things like Salesforce, Zendesk, different payment systems and that kind of thing. There's, I think, around 400 data connectors, and Microsoft is continuing releasing other ones. There's other third party that are releasing connectors as well. And so that whole integration story, again, you don't need a developer. You can actually just use those connectors and connect to these different systems. Also, there's AI Builder. Of course, we hear a lot about AI these days. AI Builder is a very easy point and click interface to build some artificial intelligence into your apps. We won't touch on that today, but I just want to make you aware of this. And of course, at the end of the day, it's really a lot of this information and data is sitting on something called Dataverse. If you've not heard the word Dataverse before, it used to be known as, because Microsoft likes to rename things on a weekly basis, I think. Dataverse is the new name for the Common Data Service. And what the Common Data Service is, it's really an API. It's more than just a database. It has a lot of other features as well. At its core is Azure SQL, Azure Cosmos DB, or blob storage, a few other things like that. So really it encompasses a lot of that data storage, but a lot of automation and security and stuff is built in with Dataverse as well. So I'm going to be kind of using that terminology quite a bit throughout this presentation. So we have no questions coming up yet. And again, don't be shy if you have questions. Put them in the question and answer window or the chat window, and we'll try to address those. So the next thing is, what is Power Apps? And I kind of skipped over that. And what Power Apps is really that low code, no code development platform to build apps. And we've all seen apps on our phones, we've seen business apps. And with Power Apps, we're able to create 3 different types of applications. And when we talk about those 3 different types of apps, there's 3 types. There's the Canvas Power Apps, there's Power App Portals, and then what we're going to be focusing on today is Model-Driven Power Apps. Now, this really isn't a competition of which is the better, is it better to build a Canvas-based Power App versus a Model-Driven Power App? It really depends on the business requirements. And the cool thing is, if this is all feeding off of the Dataverse, we can actually use multiple apps and for different tasks, but they're all talking to the same database and the same data set. I've got a question here. I'm going to open it up. What license, the question was a great question. What license do we need to have for building a Power App? If you're gonna build a Power App just to try it out, I'm actually gonna show you a way to do that for free, assuming that you have an Office 365 environment. However, if you do want to deploy it, there is a lot of licensing and subscriptions. So at the low end, there's what we call the Power Apps per user license, and that allows your users to have access to unlimited number of apps. And that's, again, I'm not a catalog. I think that runs around $40 per user per month. And then there's also the Power Apps per app, where it gives you access to 2 apps or access to a portal, and that's I think around $10 to $15 per user per month. And a lot of times people say, ooh, that seems really expensive, but if you think about it, a business application, something like Dynamics 365, for example, will run around $120, $130 per user per month, where you could probably build a Power App for some of that functionality. If you consider how much money do you spend on coffee for your employees every day, if you have a coffee machine, it's probably going to cost you like $1 or $2 per employee. Then you start putting in that context and the amount of value, the return on investment, how much time is being saved with working with some of these apps, it does become very valuable. Great question about licensing. And we're going to move on to the different types of apps. And I'm not going to really go deep into Canvas Power Apps today, but let's talk about what they are. It's a way you can drag and drop controls anywhere on a canvas. That's why it's called a Canvas app. You start with a blank screen, you just start dragging buttons on and different controls and little images. And then you can start building your apps. You can deploy them to, access them through the web, do those through a mobile device or a tablet, and a bunch of different things. Its functionality is driven by formula expressions. So if you want to have something happen when you click this button, you want some data to appear, you want some calculation to happen, it's the language behind it is driven by kind of a formula expression, very similar to Microsoft Excel macros and that sort of thing. So again, it's not hardcore programming, but there is a little bit of coding involved. So this is what we would say low code tools. And it's also very mobile friendly as well. And typically the type of applications that I would do is very task-based. We need to collect some data. We need to, do certain tasks. Very simple, very straightforward kind of task-based applications we can build with Canvas apps. I'm going to talk about the other one, which is Power Apps Portals. Now, Portals it's a website, it's a web portal with the ability to allow external stakeholders to interact with the Dataverse. Now, what I mean by that is if we're building a Power App, whether it's a Canvas app or a model-driven app, typically that application is only going to be available to people on our tenant or within our Office 365, meaning our staff, our employees, that kind of audience. With portals, this is going to our external, to our customers, to our members, to people outside of our organization. And through this, we build a website where they can access on any browser, and they can securely interact with that data, with the Dataverse. And a lot of the components are used from the model-driven app that we're going to look at in a few minutes. And it's secure. There's going to be a lot of authentication that ties in there. So people won't be able to log into a portal and see all the data that's in your database. They're only going to be allowed to see the data that you allow them to see. There's authentication, there's security features. So it's really an interesting way to surface a lot of this Power Platform to your external stakeholders. But at the end of the day, we're not here to talk about Canvas or Power Apps portals. I do want to really focus on what we've come for, and that's model-driven Power Apps. Now, if you've seen specifically Dynamics CRM before, and you look at a model-driven app, you're probably going to say, wait a minute, these look very much the same, the same design patterns. Well, this is because model-driven Power Apps originated from Dynamics CRM. And if you've worked with Dynamics CRM in the past, you're probably familiar with entities, fields, forms, views, and those customization tools. Well, that effectively is what model-driven Power Apps are. Now, it doesn't, if you're building a Power App from the ground up, it doesn't have a lot of those other things like opportunities and cases and field service. Those are things you'll still need to license Dynamics 365 for, but you can build apps, or you can actually build those apps and integrate with Dynamics 365, those customer engagement apps. At the end of the day, Dynamics 365 customer engagement is a model-driven Power App. The difference is this is an app that Microsoft has built. They license a little bit differently. And at the end of the day, it's just it's just another Power App. And then with this at the back end is Dataverse, something that I didn't mention before in regards to the Canvas apps. The Canvas apps can utilize those 400 different connectors. So you can actually take your Canvas app and use that as a front end for an Access database or a SQL database or even an Oracle database or something like that. Model-driven apps very much are aligned to Dataverse or the common data service. And what originally was for that Dynamics CRM database engine, which of course was, its foundation is Microsoft SQL. It has a standard user interface. Now, you're going to be able to manipulate those forms and views and things, and we will talk about that. But for the most part, if you create a model-driven app that does one type of functionality, and later on you might build another Power App, a model-driven Power App, your end users are going to be very familiar with the navigation of how it works, how to navigate records, how to do certain functions. It does follow a very set pattern, which makes it very powerful in terms of building apps. There's a lot of things you don't need to worry about because it's already been prescribed to you, but also has that level of familiarity as well. People are going to be familiar working with these apps. And again, like I said, a lot of different built-in features and functions. We can dump things out to Excel. We can do Word templates. We can launch Power Automate flows. We can do different sorting. We can do some analysis with that. So there's a lot of features that are already built in that we as app makers don't need to worry about. And that's something we'd have to worry about if we were building something from ground up. And this is really, it can be no code. We can build a full app with using no code at all. The app example that I'm going to show you today, we're going to build 100% not using any code whatsoever. However, if you do get into those situations where you do run up against the wall, you do need to do something very unique, you can still utilize traditional programming and coding techniques. There's a very powerful API that's provided. So for some of the client-side stuff, you could utilize JavaScript. For some of the back-end, creating plugins, you can use .NET. Most developers use C# to create these plugins. So there is that full story there. And Microsoft, you might have heard that term from Microsoft called no cliffs, meaning I kind of want to, it's more of, no brick walls. So you're not gonna, if you run into a requirement, usually if you can't solve it with the existing tools, you can actually get a developer to build some code to kind of get you over that hump. So there's really a lot of power there. And again, just a reminder that the Dynamics 365 customer engagement apps are essentially model-driven apps. So I'm going to get into, building a model-driven Power App today. We're just going to walk through the steps and everything like that. It is something that's pretty straightforward, and I kind of encourage you, if you're the type who likes to experiment and try it out, maybe after this session or later on, you can give it a shot yourself, see what you can kind of come up with. But we're just going to go through some different steps here. We're going to provision an environment, and we're going to need a Power Platform environment in which to build our app. We're going to need to provision a Dataverse, so we're going to need to get that database up and running. And then we're going to model our data, meaning we're going to take a look at the data structure, because when I talk about model-driven apps, it's really based on the data structure of the information that you're trying to manage and trying to work with. We're going to build our user interface. And again, model-driven apps has a lot of those features built in already. So it's really just tweaking it to fit our particular app. And then of course, then we're going to build our app. And I'll talk a little bit about how you would deploy that and kind of get that to your end users. And then we can talk about next steps. So once you've kind of got your app built, there's a whole launching pad and different areas you can go in terms of automation. You can build some dashboards and charts, integrations. You can use AI Builder. You can put a portal front end to it, or you can even build Canvas apps that kind of tie into it as well. So first off, and I did say, how, to build a Power App. Here's a hyperlink that, again, it's going to be part of the presentation you can download later, but you can go to that, and that's a community plan. Now, this is not meant for production use. This is really meant for experimenting and learning and trying things out, but it is free. It doesn't cost anything. You will need an Office 365 login in order to access it, but if you go to this particular URL, and you sign up for it, this will start to provision a Power Platform environment for you. And it's called a developer environment, so you can begin to play with these things beyond just building model-driven apps. It gives you the opportunity to create Canvas apps. You could also create Power Automate flows, and you can begin to experiment and try these things out. And then once you have some of these proof of concepts, these are things you can maybe start deploying to your users or to your clients. And we will talk a little bit about that as well. So first thing I'm going to do is, let's just get out of the PowerPoint. And I'm just going to move that over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the resolution of my screen, because I do realize that on a webinar, sometimes these things are a little hard to see. So let's go up to I'll try 150. If it's too much, just let me know, or if it's the right size. So I think we're good here. So I've gone in, I provisioned an environment, and it's got my name, well, the name of the user that has provisioned this. It's a developer. What I can do, if I wanted to create multiple environments or a new environment, I could do this. I'm in the Power Platform Admin Center, and there's a few different maker portals that we'll talk about. And so this, I would just go, and to create a new environment, I can just give it a name. Just call this web age test. What type is I'm going to say put it as a trial for now, because you need a licensed version to do the sandbox and production. But with the developer, you can pretty much do most things you can in your production, just obviously not deploy to production. We'll pick our region. I'm in Canada, so that's why I'm getting the Canadian there. But if I would recommend you pick, if you happen to come from other parts of the world, pick a region that's close to where you are, because propagation and things like that. Ideally, put in a description of what it's all about, if it's a developer environment or you're trying different things. And then we're going to create a database for that environment. So yes or no. Yes, most cases we want a database. Now, there might be situations where we don't need to worry about a database, because we're just going to create some personal productivity flows, or something that doesn't even require Dataverse. So we don't always have to do it, but In most cases, you will need to create a database because there's some functionality that requires it. I'll hit next here, and then again, I can pick my language. I can choose a URL or it would fill in. I pick my currency. Now, if I had Dynamics 365 licenses, and that's again for those first party apps like Dynamics 365 Sales or Dynamics 365 Service, I'd be able to provision those Dynamics 365 apps at that time. However, I don't have the licenses for that, so I'm not able to provision that. That's fine. I can hit save. And what this is going to do, it's going to start provisioning that environment on the back end. And that will take a few minutes to come up, but that's okay. It's being provisioned. What I am going to do is I'm going to go into the environment that I created already, and that's what we're going to begin to build our model-driven app with. Now, this is sort of the admin center. This is really for administrators to create environments and deploy them. They can do backups, they can do restores. There's some resource monitoring here, so we can actually take a look at the different capacities of how much space is being used. So again, depending on the licensing that you get, depends on how much space you get. So for instance, the very first license for a Power App per user license gives you 10 gigabytes of storage capacity. And then each license you buy on top of that gives you just an increment a little bit more, or you could actually just buy straight up database capacity as well, depending on what your requirements are. And then it's also split across database, file, and logs. So depending on what information you're storing, it will depend on what sort of database capacity it's using. Obviously, the pricing is a little bit different across these different types. You don't really need to worry about it so much right now, but it is something, as you get into this, you might want to explore a little bit further. There's a whole bunch of other administration pieces here. I'm not going to get into that because we want to be building our apps. But again, just wanted to point that out in the Power Platform Admin Center. And it's basically admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com that takes you there. So let's get into building an app. So if we've provisioned our environment and a couple things we want to do here, when we're in, I'm now into what we call the Maker portal, and I'm going to increase the size of this as well. So they're at 150. And I just go to make.powerapps.com. If I do that, that will actually prompt me for my Office 365 credentials. And of course, we need an environment provisioned for this. So I've done this. And now what I want to do is we have the opportunity to create some apps. I can create a Canvas app, a model-driven app, or a portal from blank. Now, before we dive too deeply into this, building the app, what we want to do is model our data a little bit. And to model our data, a lot of times when I help my customers build a Power App, they're kind of coming from a world where they're managing data using something like Excel, or maybe they have an old Access database. So a particular example, I was working with a client recently, and they were managing sort of a grant subsidy program. And not exactly like this, I just kind of gave this as an example, but they were managing everything in a spreadsheet. So they would put down the company name, the information about the company, the contact person, the email address, the phone number, and what the status was. Is this a new request? Where's this at? And then they would put in some other information about the student, what the job is starting, when it's ending, what employer's contribution, what subsidy amount that they were contributing, what's the total salary, and managing all this. And it kind of worked well, but they were having struggles doing reporting. And then the worst of the worst happened. One of their users that was working with this actually did a file save as copy in one of their other spreadsheets, and they overwrote the spreadsheet. They literally lost months worth of data. Their backups were not really working like they should be either. So they had to dig through a lot of emails and correspondence to rebuild all of this information. And with that, plus a few other challenges, they had, okay, there's got to be a better way. Of course, when you kind of look on the open market for a application that manages grants and subsidies and things like that, yes, there are a few out there, but they didn't quite match, or they're very expensive. So they, they were using the Power Platform for other things. So this was an opportunity to build an application using the Power Platform to manage this type of spreadsheet data. So first thing, as I would do as a, whether I'm a solution architect or a functional consultant, is let's take a look at this Excel spreadsheet and let's begin to break out the data model. And what I would do is I would sort of use, for example, something like my whiteboard, and I would begin to draw out the data model. So I'm just going to slide this back here, and I'm going to pop back to the deck for a minute. And what I would do is I would start to draw out the different models within the, that I want, or the different data types. So one of the data types was employer. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have a separate employer is because if you notice in my spreadsheet, companies could be listed multiple times. I didn't want to keep re-entering that data. That's things can get out of whack. We have all sorts of duplicates there. So let's create our own model for that. Contacts, that's another, we have a lot of different people. But what if that person who works for that employer, maybe they're also a student and they're also entitled to a subsidy as well. So what happens there? Do we have two different data types? And then, we need to track that placement information. And this is stuff like the start date, the end date, the amount that's going to be as per subsidy, the salary contribution. So there's three sort of, I would say, groupings of information that I would begin to do and begin to model out my data. So if this was like, building a traditional app from ground up, it's very simple to say, okay, we need to start building a tables within our database. We need an employer table. We need a contact table. We need a placement table. And this is similar to what we'll do within the Power Platform and Dataverse, but let's just kind of put the brakes on for one little second here. Something like employer and contact, I would say in most of the apps that I've built over the years, there's always that concept of like either a company or an account or an organization, and we keep reusing the same thing. We keep adding the address fields, we keep adding the website fields, all of these types of fields. That's very common. Same with contact, we're always dealing with people, so things like first name, last name, email address, phone number, also very common. Now, placements, that's a little bit uncommon. That's sort of something that's very unique to this business process. So as opposed to going out and, again, reinventing the wheel when it comes to employer and contact, I'm going to go back to my Power Platform, to my Maker portal. And if we look at data, when we provision a Dataverse, automatically it comes with a whole series of predefined tables. So I have things like account, activity, address, appointments, attachments, business units, contacts. These things kind of come standard, and this is what's called the common data model, meaning these are features that are common across the board. So something like the account and contact, that's been part of CRM systems for years, since day one. So as opposed to me recreating the wheel, reinventing the wheel, I'm actually to go through and I'm going to identify some Dataverse tables that already exist that I'm going to utilize, and so without having to reinvent the wheel. So if I click on account here and I take a look at the columns, meaning the fields, I have things like account name, I have address, one city, county, country, region. We have other things I might not need, but state, province, street, one. So as opposed to me recreating this already exists. So I'm just going to use it. Same thing with the contact. There's a lot of columns here already. So things like first name, last name, I'm just going to give this a second to come up. The different address information, the different street information, and all of that's already there. And then for those of you who might not have worked much with databases before, there is that concept of a relational database, how these things link together. So if I were to look down at these fields, I do have, I'm gonna actually search for it, it should be called parent. And here I have a parent customer, and that's a, a field name, but it's if I look at the advanced options, it's a relationship. It already has that relationship to my account table. So a lot of those one-to-many and many-to-one relationships have already also been predefined. So again, that's something else I don't need to worry about. So I've now had those two different things, but then I start looking for something like placements or grants or something. I can't really find that. That doesn't really exist. There might be something similar, so there's different things here. So for the most part, there might be a case of now I need to take this information and create my own table. So I could do that in here. I could hit new table, but again, we're trying to have everything packaged up so we could deploy it to other systems. What I will do is I'm going to create something called a solution. And a solution in context of the Power Platform is a package to group a bunch of those assets together. So I've already created a solution here called placement tracking. So what I could have done is I could have created a new solution, give it a name, a display name, a regular name, a publisher. We do need a publisher that links these things together. I can give it a version number. And if we get more into application lifecycle management, those version numbers can increase and we can move it to source code. Again, that's a whole other conversation for another day, but we do have that idea of building these packages out. So I've created this placement tracking solution. And if I take a look here, I've got some assets in here. I have my account table in my contact table. I've added those to my solution. So I just went into add existing, I chose table, and then from there, I was able to go through and find the particular table I wanted and added that to my solution. Easy peasy. However, for placement, that wasn't something that existed. I needed to create that. So what I did was I went in, I created a table, and then from that table, I'd give it, this comes up here, I'd give it a display name, a plural name. I need to set some things like the primary name column and a few other things, whether I'm going to enable attachments and those types of things. So very similar if you've ever used something like Access before. But again, this is very much point and click, creating that new table. Now I've created this table already, my placement table. So I'll show you what happened there. And again, I am building this within the context of a solution. So here I have my placement table. I have now a whole bunch of fields will automatically get created. So again, this is a benefit of the Power Platform. So I have a created by, a created on. I do have an owner, a business unit, those types of things. Those relate to the security context. I'm not going to dive too deep into security today, but ideally we can have a whole security rules that give people access to certain components of our solution. So we have all these fields. Now I created a bunch of other fields. First off, I've added a link to the employer. And again, that's a lookup, a link to the employer contact. And then I've added a currency field for the employer contribution. It did create a base field along with that. So without going too deep in that, we do have the ability to use multi-currency functionality within our app. So if we're dealing with multiple currencies, Dataverse deals with that very easily. We have things like end date, start date, a few other things. So if I wanted to add a new field, I would just go and add a new column, and I'll put in something like a very simple text field. I'm going to call this a description, what data type it is. We have a whole bunch of different data types like text, areas, whole numbers, date, time. We have choices, currency, lookups, decimal numbers, different things like that. I'm just going to leave it as text. Whether it's a required field or not, we can set that. Whether it's searchable, we can add some calculations and roll-ups as well. So we can begin to add a little bit of automation here. Again, a description so we can kind of keep track of what it is, and some other advanced options in terms of if we're enabling column security, meaning we can actually secure particular fields within our application, the different lengths, how much text we want to hold in that. And then I could just hit done. And now it's sitting there, and I'm just going to save my table. And that's just going to add that column to the database. So I don't need to go into the back end. I don't need to go into SQL Server and add that column. The Power Platform is going to take care of all that for me and put in the right logic and build out all the metadata and stuff that go along with that. So I've created my tables. I do have those relationships. I've recreated my data model. Now we're going to go in and create some of our user interface controls. Now, again, the great thing about the Power Platform is it comes automatically with some user interface controls already built in. So if I'm going to look at my account table that I brought in from the Common Data Service, and I'm going to add some subcomponents that already exist, I already have things like my views and my forms. So really, those are the two building blocks of the application, or views, which are lists of data, and forms, which are sort of that, see that detail, add some information. So I'm just going to add my account form, and I'm going to add that to my solution. And I'm maybe going to add a view as well. So I can create a new view here. Actually, I'm going to add an existing view. So I wanted to add subcomponents. Let's add an existing view. I'm just going to add the active accounts view. Let's add this. And I've gone and added that view. So we have that there. So already we have some user interface controls that are already by default part of the the Dataverse. So here I look at that view, I see account name, my main phone, and I do have some sample data already loaded. So I can begin to design that view. I can add some view columns. So again, if you've worked with Dynamics CRM before, you're probably very familiar with being able to create your own views and modify them. So I can change the size. I can add other columns to this. I could add the sorting. I could add other filters, and I could do a whole bunch of different things with this view designer. And again, or I could just use the defaults out of the box, which for the most part I've used for this particular app. If I look at forms, I have the account form. And again, it's already come pre-built with a form. It's taking a second here to come up. And this is sort of the thing with cloud software. Sometimes we do have to sort of wait for some of the things to come through. Microsoft is continually improving this. This is taking a little while, but what's going to happen is we're going to have a form designer come up here where again, we can begin to, drag on the different columns and tabs. So model-driven apps do follow a very prescribed way of displaying information, but we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can do the layouts and things like that. So this is taking its time. So what I'm actually going to do is instead, I'm going to go back to and I'm going to go into the one where we need to create it from scratch. So let's go in my solution, and I'm going to go into this placement table. And I've already added a form earlier, but typically what I would do as I'm building this app out, I would add my different forms. So we have sort of these base forms, and I'm going to go into that one. And hopefully this one comes up a little bit faster. So as this is sort of, coming up, this is the form designer. So again, I have the different properties information. I have my, it's broken down by a header, the general section. We have the footer as well. This is still taking its time. Now, even with that and previewing how it's going to look, I have all by default here my desktop. I can also flip to see what it's going to look like in a tablet, what it's going to look like on a phone or a responsive screen. The cool thing with those model-driven apps is they are responsive. So if you were to bring this app up on a phone or on a tablet, it will adjust and the things will move around accordingly to kind of fit exactly what it should look like. Now this is interesting, it's taking a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the old editor, which you still have access to. And this is going back to what they call the classic. And I'm just going to sign in here. And really, depending on what you're doing, these are the classic tools. This is sort of borrowing it from Dynamics CRM, but this is still, so now you see with the form designer, it's a little bit of an older interface, but again, very similar. I can begin to move and drag my fields around a little bit. So here I have the placement number, the employer, the contact, the total salary. I can add, different sections and columns and subgrids. There's a lot of different controls and things I can add to this interface to make it a little bit easier for my users. But again, at the end of the day, it does follow a certain format. So I'm just going to pop out of here. I'm not going to commit to any of my changes. Just blame this on internet weather. And of course, doing a demo, there's always got to be at least one little glitch, right? So we'll just sort of, again, if you're into building your app, this should come up with a way to design your form. going to go back to my solution now. So effectively what we've done at the end of the day is we've got our forms and our views. And now this will take a bit of time as we're building out our app because we're going to maybe want to create different forms for different purposes or different views. What I will do is I'll just pop over to my PowerPoint here because I do have a screenshot of the view designer. It's maybe a little bit hard to see, but you'll be able to see here on the display, we have the view designer, which I did show you, but we have this form designer. And again, you can begin to drag and drop and change around what those things will look like. So now that we've got our user interface built out, and again, I'm kind of like a cooking show. I'm kind of speeding things along with my prepared things already. What I will do is now we'll go into within our solution. I've created something called an app. So what I would do is I create new and I create an app. And then from here, I have the ability to create a Canvas app or a model-driven app. So I created a model-driven app, and let's go in and take a look. So this doesn't look like a whole bunch, but we have different things here. So here are those different entities I talked about earlier, my account, my contact, my placement. And then from here, I'm going to choose what forms are available. So by default, I picked all the forms for account. For placement, excuse me, I have the information form. That was something I've added here, and my different views of what I want to pick. So I've got my forms and my views. I've selected them. If I was later on, Microsoft wants my feedback. My feedback is don't bug me during the webinar. Anyways, I'm going to go on, and we could create charts and dashboards as part of our app as well. Again, I'm keeping it very simple. And then the other thing I would do here is I would begin to edit my sitemap. And this is where we can begin to kind of design how that flow would work for an end user. So I have here, I'm going to add a section. I call that placement. I could add other sections. Let's add another one just for administration purposes. So I just call that admin. And I can drag other groups and sub areas here. If I take a look at my placement, I have broken it down to stakeholders. So I'm going to organize my accounts and contacts in a stakeholder section. And then in my placement, I'm going to put my placements, and maybe I might start adding other tables as my app evolves over time. So I'm just going to save this, and I'm just going to publish this particular app. And I've got this, so let's just save and close my sitemap. I've added my entities, I have my sitemap here. So let's actually play this app and see what it looks like. So like I said, anybody who's ever worked with Dynamics 365 customer engagement apps or CRM, you'll probably find this very familiar. So here you've seen I've created some views, we had some forms, and I have a listing of all my accounts. I've loaded some sample data. Here's that site map. Here's what it's looking like under my stakeholders. I have my contacts. I can take a look at my contact information here, see that in a view, and then I'm going to take a look at placement. So this little has a puzzle piece here. That means it's like a custom entity. We can create our own icons on here, and definitely if this was a production ready app, I would have my own icon that I would download from the web or get someone to design for me. I have here these active placements. If I wanted to, I could create a brand new record, a new placement. What's the number? So number 4. What's the employer? This is a lookup field. Let's just pick Alpine Ski House. Who's the contact? Again, and we could filter these lookups as well. So I can only show contacts that belong to Alpine Ski House. What's the employer contribution? Let's say they put in 5,000, dismiss that. And the subsidy amount was 1,500. And notice that this is locked out because when I created my total salary, I made that a calculated field. So I'm just going to hit save. I saved the record. Notice it calculated that total salary for me. And I'm going to take this a step back, and now this is now added to my list of placements in my app. And I can begin to look at different things. If I was to look at an account, let's look at a Datum Corporation. And here's name, address, phone number, and all this. Of course, we can start building other applications around this and keep accessing that same data. If I look at related, I can see, oh, what are the related placements that a data incorporation might have applied to? I can look at that placements and, well, here's placement one, not the best view in the world, but I can drill down from that. And that again is just drilled down from that A data incorporation. So this is what we call, this is where when we talk about CRM, we talked about customer relationship management, meaning these have all these different relationships in this app. Now, along with all of this information I have in here, there's a lot of extra functionality. So for example, I could maybe email a link, I can delete, I can add. I didn't need to add these buttons. These are here by default. I can export to Excel. So if there's people that still love to have Excel sheets, I can actually take this data and dump it out to an Excel sheet. And let's just open that up for a second here. So that is the one I had earlier, but it's refreshing. So let's just view that. Let's zoom in a little bit to, so yeah, I've dumped that out to Excel. The other cool thing here is I can update this information and re-upload that back into my Power App. So if you have folks that like working with Excel, even though I'm a big fan of model-driven apps, we can still utilize Excel for a lot of the, that kind of data entry work. So we have, the app here does a bunch of other things, and I could, there's a lot of different things. I can create some templates. I can, do some emailing. We could also do some Word templates from here. We could actually show some dashboards. I don't have any charts set up yet, but we could create some charts and dashboards. We could launch Power Automate flows from here as well. So if you've used Microsoft Flow or Power Automate, we could actually have some flows fully integrated into our Power App. There's a ton of stuff that we can do here, but you saw how simple that was. It didn't take me very long to put together a fully functional business application. And just using point and click, you notice I did not write any code at all. Even that calculated field was just sort of done, kind of by pointing and clicking a few things as well. So there's a lot you can do with this whole system to build some pretty cool Power Apps. So I'm just kind of continuing on with this I do sort of taken sort of screenshots of each step of the way. We talked about building the Power App and we're testing it. We tried it out. Some next steps. So one thing that kind of comes up, okay, now that we've built that in that environment, what we can do is take that solution, we can export that to a file, bring it to our production, and then import it. Now, that's one way to do it, but I would recommend looking at some ALM capabilities with that. With Azure DevOps, there's tools where we can begin to move and deploy. There's also the Power Platform Center of Excellence that helps sort of with some of those chores as well. So a lot of different things to deploy the apps. The other things that I didn't have time to, show you today, things like business process flows. So we can begin to guide our users so they're not just entering raw data, they're following a specific prescribed step, they're collecting certain pieces of data, and we can integrate that into our model-driven app. Again, you saw I was able to run Power Automate. So with Power Automate, I'm able to take information, send it out. In this particular application for my client, I actually use Power Automate, the approvals automation. So the users, the people that actually have to approve those placement applications, they could do it from using directly from their email. It's like very similar to voting buttons. But there's a lot you can do with Power Automate to update data, to manipulate data, to create new records. Sky's the limit with that. Again, we could create some dashboards and charts. Executives love to see dashboards, love to see where things are at. And again, this could be something we could see. How much grant money did we give out this year? How much are we still waiting on applications? What's the percentage of success? Those types of things. Using Power Automate, using some other tools, we can integrate to other systems. Of course, with the Power Platform, there are ways to integrate with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations and Business Central. There's a lot of different ways to attack these types of problems, or even use Power Automate and have it tied to other systems as well. If we wanted, we could build some Canvas apps. So maybe if we were taking placement applications like in a training room or something, we could maybe build an application form using a Canvas app so people will be able to take those applications, and that would save that data directly to Dataverse. Or we could have a portal, we could have an online application. this project that I talked about, they actually have an online application. We're using Power Apps portals to collect that information. And then kind of going further on down the road is we can use AI Builder and analyze that data and put some models against that and begin to do a lot of really cool stuff. And again, we can always extend that using Pro Code as well. So there's those plugins, there's JavaScript, we could tie it to Azure Functions. There's a lot of stuff we can do to extend our model-driven app to make it more powerful. So that's it for my presentation. I do believe you'll be sent a link for an evaluation as well. So definitely let us know, and so we can, for me as well as a presenter, just where I can improve or things like that. Any questions about this particular presentation that I gave today? Okay, so question is, does this integrate well with Teams new approvals workflow now? Yeah, I've done integrations with using Teams, specifically, what do they call adaptive cards? I know I've built some labs for Microsoft around that. So, you should be able to integrate with Teams. That's another thing I didn't touch on today was there is a way to deploy Dataverse within Teams. You might have heard of something called Project Oakdale. It's called Dataverse for Teams. So you can build Canvas apps within the context of Teams and use Power Automate within the context of Teams. ModelDriven is not there for Teams yet, although I do believe it is on the roadmap. So that would be something to keep an eye out for. Of course, the licensing changes. It's a lot more much more friendly if they're using Teams. It's a great question. So I'm just trying to see. Like I said, I apologize. I'm having some little weirdness happening with my question thing here. Let's see if I can pop that out. Oh, here we go. Using Power Automate, how does the licensing work for each Power App form? So yeah, with a Power App per user license, you do get a certain amount of flow allocation. So you can still create flows, but I don't have the number on the top of my head. It's a great question of how many flows you get as opposed to having just a straight up Power Automate license. But definitely when you have a Power App license, you do have a certain allocation of flows included with that. In a lot of cases, it usually is more than enough, but you can always top that up as well. Like I said, I don't know the licensing guide inside and out. To be quite honest, Microsoft changes their licensing as often as I change my socks. So it's kind of hard to stay on top of these days, but hopefully that helps as well. Any other questions from anybody? And like I said, I'll throw up my my particular credentials as well at the start of the slides. So if you do think of something down the road, don't be shy, just kind of reach out to me. If there's quick questions or whatever, I don't mind answering. If it's a much bigger thing, definitely that's a whole other conversation. But anyways, I just want to make sure that you have the information you need. So, well, if there's no more questions, or if you guys are shy and you want to save your questions till later, definitely fill out the the evaluation form. And I believe like I said, I don't have that link exactly in front of me right now, but I believe you all be emailed that. So get that registration back, that evaluation back. I'm going to have this deck available later this afternoon, so you guys can download that and check that out. And thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your time today, and I really hope that you've learned something.